I recently was able to attend the Monet exhibit here at the Art Institute in Chicago, and I really enjoyed the show, and I was impressed with being able to see, because it was such a broad span of his work that covered, basically his entire career, although not every piece was there. But there was enough to be able to see these major shifts that he went through with his work, what he was struggling with. And from an artist's perspective, I could really relate as I saw him grow and make these decisions that that had big impacts on his work. So I wanted to put together this slideshow for you. I hope you enjoy it. And with that, I'm going to get started.
Monet is known as the founder of the Impressionist movement. He was French and born in 1840. He was very interested in becoming an artist from the time he was young. He would go out into the community and draw the locals in charge for the caricature drawings he did of them. You can see how talented he is, even though, of course, he's exaggerating the features, but he's really skilled as at doing these figurative drawings. He said that he could have become a millionaire at a young age had he stayed with doing the caricature drawings. But he was interested in pursuing painting the figure, and he was very interested in painting the landscape, and specifically in painting while he was outdoors in the landscape. He met an artist by the name of Eugene Boudon, who was very influential in Monet's entire career. He met him when he was 18 years old, and Boudon was a plein air painter, which was very unusual at the time. If you're not familiar with the term, it's going outside and painting from life. Landscapes are usually associated with plein air painting, but you can do cityscapes or anything that you're doing painting outside in the air. And Monet was really trying to emulate artists whose work he respected and admired. This is the first large-scale figurative piece Monet did called Women in the Garden. He wanted to enter this particular painting in the Paris Salon Show. The Paris Salon Show was the most sought-after exhibition that artists would try to get into. It was a curated show, so it was very difficult to get into. And he wanted to enter this piece. He didn't finish it in time. And actually, even when he didn't get very good critical acclaim for this piece. He used his first wife as the model for the piece. And you can see that the figures seem relatively cut out and placed into the landscape. If you're not a painter and you've never tried to solve the problem of putting together multiple sources in doing a work, especially if you're doing work where there's a sense of light and maybe you have the source for the landscape and maybe you're trying to put people in it like he did in this case, or you're putting different elements, whether it's a landscape or not, the sense of light is what makes something believable in a lot of the cases. And here, well, he's tried to make it believable by, kind of putting the light across her dress. It's not really. The figures look somewhat out of place and look a little fake-like, and it didn't meet with very positive critical acclaim. This is a piece he did when he was 26 years old. It's called The Beach at Sante Dress. It's from 1867, and, he was 27 years old. And you can see again the naivete in the use of the color of some of the areas where he's using, almost looks like a beige right out of the tube that he hasn't mixed, and he's using in this entire area. The people are very kind of stick-like, and he's used an all-over kind of blue color for the boat, which is appropriate in some people's works and what they're dealing with. But you can see he's kind of dealing with the boats in one way and the people in another way. The boats are kind of soft and the people are very cut out looking. So he wants to be a maritime painter. And he obviously is trying to aspire to becoming, getting some critical acclaim in these genres, but he's not having any success. This is another early work that he did. This is on the banks of the Seine, and he was 28 when he painted this. And again, he's really just trying to find the right genre that he excels at. And you can see this woman, he's trying to paint her as being, gazing off into the distance, being relaxed on the shore, but she's quite stiff, and she's, awkward looking. And he's using the same little formulas of this all over green in the foreground and this kind of large areas of this beige in the midground, and then he's using the same green here in the tree, and there's not a particularly nice gesture to the tree trunk, so very stiff. I would say the word that I think of as characterizing these early works where he's kind of jumping from genre to genre, trying to get noticed, is a stiffness that he loses by the during his career. He really struggled financially because his father cut him off. Financially because Monet refused to abandon painting, and his mother had passed away when he was 16. So, but in his early 30s, his father passed away and he got a small inheritance, and he was able to rent a home for a 6.5 year period in Argenteuil. And so this is the artist house at Argenteuil, and you can see still again, it's almost happening accidentally, where some of these areas of paint and the use of the brush stroke are beginning to develop. He's beginning to, well, he's very interested. He documented that he was very interested in figures in the garden. So he's trying to use that formula, but he's also still not really integrating some of the elements that are, again, all one color here and all one color for the sky. But he's starting to slip into this language that he begins to develop much more strongly again in his early 50s. In 1870, Monet left France because he didn't want to be drafted into the Franco-Prussian War. And while he was in London, he met a very well-known Romanticist painter by the name of Joseph Mallord William Turner. And if you study art, you'll know that Turner was a very important Romanticist painter. And it's the timing of this piece, the Monet's piece, is interesting not only when it happens, but what happens afterwards, because Monet seems to kind of go back and forth between finding his voice and still trying to emulate other artists. It's almost like he's trying to gain the confidence to really search within him what are the elements that he has to contribute, to viewers with his work, which is so common. It's one of the reasons I wanted to do this little presentation, because as we grow as individuals throughout life, we really start to become more confident in who we are and what our voice is and what's important to us and what makes us unique. And when you're a painter, you're always leaving evidence of that struggle in every work that you do. And when you can see all of these works of Monet's career and how he kind of jumps forward, and then he'll, with some more free ways of painting, and then he'll kind of revert back to what he's aspiring to do, where he's trying to get recognition, and that's not working. And so, at any rate, this particular piece, on the left is the Turner piece. It's Scarlet Sunrise, Scarlet Sunset, and it was painted in 1839. And then this piece of Monet's Monet saw this painting to begin with, and it's documented that he did. And then Monet emulated it in his own work, Impression Sunrise. This was exhibited in 1874. Because he wasn't getting the recognition from the critics that he really, really wanted to have, he and his colleagues, or he and his peers, formed a group of artists called the Anonymous Society of Painters. And they were really rejecting, on the one hand, some of the visual formal elements of the Romanticist painters. In a lot of the Romanticist painters, they really did a very, very high contrast lights and darks. And the Impressionists wanted to really focus on lighter colors and not necessarily a single subject that was the focus of a work. And so they formed this group, and their first exhibit here was where Monet exhibited Impression Sunrise, and this is the piece that the Impressionist movement was named after. What surprises me about this particular piece is he painted it after Impression Sunrise. This is the Parc Monceau, which is 1878, and again, he reverts back to this struggle he was having with really trying to be successful in painting the figure in the landscapes. And as you can see, he's kind of falling back into some of his old patterns here. This foreground foliage is the same color green, a couple different greens, all saturated. Almost looks like it came right out of the tube. They're not this beautiful symphony of these different hues that are forming together as you view them into these different combinations as your eye processes them. So again, almost the same intensity of green throughout the whole work. It's not a terribly inspiring piece, and it didn't get a lot of acclaim. Now, when we get to this work, which is a very well-known work, I'm sure most of you have seen it. It's called On the Cliff of Fourville, or the Cliff Walk, excuse me, of Fourville. And this is 1882. So this is 4 years after the Green Park scene. You can see certainly the colors are going to be different in this particular seascape, but you can see an enormous jump forward he's made with how he's making decisions about color. He's not, probably this water was all one color, but he's not painting it all one color. He's got these really pretty lavenders and really soft greens, and then he's got these beautiful energetic brush strokes in the poofy clouds, and he's got this lyrical brush stroke. You can see it over and over again as the wind is blowing the grasses, and then the beautiful, very gestural brush strokes in the clothing of the women on the cliff there. So a massive jump forward in his work with his ability to just sort of let go of this kind of grip of what he's supposed to paint, and not allowing himself to make some of those decisions in the past that he's starting to take on the responsibility for in these works. And at the same time, he's also releasing his this idea he had in his mind of he has to paint the green or the brown, grass brown. I mean, look at the color that he's put these, this paint down, that is if you look at it from a distance, it has the same beautiful, kind of rusticy, beigey impression. But when you're looking really closely at all these little brush strokes that create that, he's combined all these little bits of hue in all these beautiful purples and pinks and maroons. And certainly, they weren't truly pink and purple and maroon, although they probably had slight casts to that. But he was very interested in leaching out of the neutral colors that he was seeing, these beautiful hues of these, subtle, lighter toned hues. So in any event, a big jump forward for him at this part in his work. This I thought was really interesting. This, when he went to the Académie Suisse when he was a younger man, he met Renoir, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, who was very well, his work was very well received. And this particular piece is the Renoir. And again, Renoir was a contemporary of his that he met in art school. And this Renoir, the Renoir is Luncheon of the Boating Party, done in 1883, I believe. No, 1880. And then this is Monet's work done 3 years later. And even the title, Luncheon Under the Tent, is mimicking the Renoir. So he seems to be, in this part of his career, kind of vacillating between trying to branch out on his own with these experimental things he's doing in paint, trying to make some of his use of color his own, searching for his own satisfaction in how he's using color, but not quite getting the confidence to continue along that thread, and always falling back to, what are my friends doing that is successful? What do I love about what they're doing? Maybe I can do that. And this is a great example of that. It was funny because when I saw this piece, I hadn't even seen this Monet before, but I immediately knew he knew Renoir, because this is such a well-known, the Renoir is so well-known. This particular piece, The Boats at Etreta, dates back to when he was 45. It's 1885. And this is one of my favorite pieces from the show. When I got up close and looked at this particular boat, I could see that the texture underneath the yellow did not line up with the yellow brushstroke. So I knew he had struggled with some of the elements in this work. He was really trying to get at the form rather than just sort of on this sort of not necessarily thinking through some of the decisions. And when he gets to some of these areas that are in shadow, you can see this absolutely gorgeous symphony of these darker values. And he's not just painting an all over area of brown or beige. In fact, he's creating those neutrals by using the dark blues and the dark greens and the dark oranges and letting those visually mix to the viewer. And so if you stand back, it looks like a neutral, but if you get up close, you see that that neutral is really created with all these different hues and different value ranges. So absolutely beautiful piece. This is Storm at Bellier, and he wrote that this island was incredibly treacherous, and he even had some worse things to say about it. But it really brought out the best in him and what he needed at that point in his career, because he really needed to let go of this stiffness and this hesitation and this cautiousness that was really marked a good portion of his mid-career. He was finding this sort of almost formulaic approach to laying down color, but he hadn't really let go of these inhibitions yet until you see these groups of work where he was working in the environment in some difficult weather. And if you've ever worked in a plein air situation, you've ever worked in bad weather, when I saw these pieces, I could just see the scene, because if you're out there with even the slightest amount of wind and you've got a canvas, I mean, that canvas is going to catch the wind and you've got to hold it down, and you need your hands free when you're painting, and you've got your whole setup out there. So you can imagine how challenging this was for him. You can see the winds would have had to have been strong for the seas to be as rough as he painted them, but absolutely gorgeous brush strokes, highly charged, because he was in a hurry trying to record what he was seeing. Beautiful use of color, because he's already starting to develop that in his work. Beautiful subtleties going on in all these different areas of the water. Just stunning, stunning piece. Now he starts these Haystacks in 1890, and over a couple-year period, he has begun to get some notoriety in his works, but the Haystacks is what really gives him the acclaim and the financial success that he's really been seeking. And he's been renting a place at renting the house at Giverny, and on the property, near the property, is this area where these haystacks are. And so he starts to kind of move away from the Impressionist formula and uses more of a focus on a larger form, on a subject in the work. So the Haystacks were really where he began to sort of step out of the comfort zone of either another genre from another artist that he was emulating, or from the group that he had formed, and really starting to pursue what it was that he was seeing in his own work that was interesting to him, and how he wanted to handle the subject his own way. And you start to see this intuition he had about color really begin to be developed. And so, here we have this brownish haystack, right? It's a straw-colored haystack, and yet he's trusting the beautiful part of his work and his what he's interested in, to put together this beige with these really beautifully saturated hues. And the other thing that you see him doing is putting color combinations next to each other. There is a phenomenon called Chromosteropsis, where your eye processes color, light waves, in a slightly different way than it normally does, in a couple of different color combinations. One is red and blue, and one is green and red. And when similar intensities of those hues are placed directly next to each other, they are not absorbed, or they don't hit, the neuroscientists believe they don't hit the cones which process color in the back of your eye at the same time, and cause this effect of kind of vibrating form. And so this is what the these psychedelic posters were all about in the 60s and 70s. But you see that he intuitively knew that this was happening, and he continued to do it over and over again with both reds and blues and purples and blues, and so kind of varying the combinations of that. And what the effect is this sort of vibrating, glowing form that really is what put him on the map, critically, from a critical acclaim perspective and financially. And you can see another close-up example of that. You see the orange brush strokes and kind of the peachy and the green and the yellow and a mauve-y color. You're not seeing really very little that's kind of a tanny color. It's all these this play of these different hues that form together. And you're also seeing here a much more confident way of dealing with other elements in the landscape. Now, these series of bridges that he did, this is the Waterloo Bridge that he did in London after the Haystacks, I put in our slideshow because one of the patterns I kept seeing over and over again with Monet's work is as he would go through these areas of study, whether it was a location or a genre, when he would get to the end of that study period, a few years, especially once he got beyond 50 years old, he really started to use purple at the end of that groups of work in a very liberal way, purples that were really vibrant. And you can see this, actually this slide does not do this painting justice, but a lot, again, purples and blues and reds next to each other to kind of cause this vibration. But you see it in the lily pad works at the end of his series of lilies, where you begin to see a much more liberal use of purples than you see in the early pieces here. So this, I wanted to include the Japanese bridge here from his garden at Giverny. Now, he did eventually buy the property, buy the house at Giverny, and he spent many, many years having the garden expanded, and he painted almost exclusively, with these few exceptions of traveling from the Giverny garden location at his home. And he started in some of these Japanese bridge paintings, but one of the things I found that jumped out at me right away was that he was using the reds and the greens right next to each other in all of this foliage, which again causes that Chromosteropsis vibration. This is a close-up of one of the lily pad works, and you can see as he begins to be more probably, I would guess, one of the components is more financially secure and getting the acclaim and becoming older and really feeling like he knows what it is he's interested in and which elements he wants to push, and he starts to let go of these predictable or these expected scene elements. You start to see the bigger brush strokes and the the more rapid laying down of paint that starts to begin to emulate when he was in some of these other bad weather situations from works that he had done years earlier. This is another one of my favorites from the show. It's a large piece, and again, another step forward in him letting go of these expected elements. And this is a really, really hard thing for artists to do. I'd say for me, it's about the most difficult thing that I've ever done in my work. It comes up over and over again as I progress as a painter, and I think every painter can probably relate to this, that one of the hardest things you have to do as a painter is to let go of what you think expectations are on your images. And he finally gets there. He really struggled with it. The younger Monet was, the more he struggled with it, again, which is very, very common. And as he gets older, he becomes much, much more willing to just paint what's important to him. This painting is a great example because he has removed all of these expected elements of the landscape that define that this is an actual pond, right? There's no perimeter elements, and he's really focusing on line and brush stroke You can see these beautiful long, gestural lines, this rich, rich purple, and then no defining shape to the water. It's all about these beautiful lines for him. Of course, we know it's lily pads because they still have some elements that look like lily pads, and because, it came in this series of lily pad works for him. But it's met with this freedom of using line and paint and color in this very characteristic way. This is irises. This is 1914. He actually went through a period where his sight was failing because he had cataracts, and he had friends who had some botched surgeries, so he was afraid to have the surgery. And when he finally did, because he did, and regained some of his ability to see color, he went back into a lot of the works to kind of readdress what the color should be. But this piece is a lovely piece because, again, he's got the very saturated color combinations next to each other. This is blue and yellow, not blue and red, but it really has this dimensionality to it. And then the rich purples. Another large piece, he starts to really expand in the size of his works. This is the last slide I have, and I put this in because I feel like it's such an excellent example of where he was at the end of his career. You can see he's really left all of these obligations he's had in his mind mentally, these expectations of having to depict the landscapes in this predictable way, in this defined way, in this structured way, and he's really decided to move squarely into his use of color, trusting who he is as a painter, what his strengths are, using that lyrical line. He's left these really small brushstrokes that were really repetitive in his mid-career. He did a whole lot of paintings. I didn't include them in the show. Some of I don't think I included any of them actually, but except for maybe Cliff Walk on Fourville, where it was a lot of the same little brushstroke throughout the whole thing that just kind of made you feel like he was frantically sitting there putting these brushstrokes down, just trying to get through it. This is not. This is him really working from his gut, really having fun, really enjoying himself, and it's just light and beautiful. How he feels comes across, and he wrote about that he was trying to get at how the environment made him feel. And this is another transition that's really, really hard for artists to get to let go of, I am trying to make this painting what it looks like, and I'm going to paint what I feel. And that's when the core of the artist really comes out. And this is just an absolutely brilliant piece of Monet's. And he did a lot of these beautiful, large scale, very lyrical, beautiful works at the end of his career. That's the end of our slideshow. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have an opportunity to see a Monet exhibit in the near future. If you do, go up close and take a close look at Monet's, the surface of his works. Thanks for joining me.